but thank you for hanging in there. So good evening, and welcome to part one of Heavy, an American Memoir by Kiese Layman. I'm Dr. Nicole Carter, and I'm a member of the Smart Brown Girl cohort. So I'm really excited, but I'll be honest, I'm a little nervous to discuss this book or memoir because of the topics that are being covered within it. But I know together we will be able to do some deep diving into a great text. So before we get started, make sure you grab a copy of the syllabus so that you can follow along and ask questions and sort of get used to exploring the terms and the themes and get to know a little bit about the author as well. The link is in the description if you want to access the syllabus. So a bit about Kiese Layman. For those who read this piece, you know that this work is based upon his life in Jackson, Mississippi, and he currently teaches creative writing at Otta Lilly Schillig Professor. He's a Otta Lilly Schillig Professor of English and Creative Writing at the University of Mississippi. Somebody asked who's the guest today. I don't think we have a guest today. So I'm the guest. I don't know. But yes, he teaches at the University of Mississippi. And so yeah, let's get started. So throughout the text and throughout the discussion, the themes that we'll discuss are fat phobia, race, gender, Black motherhood, the Black South, Black Southern life, respectability politics, sexual violence, sexuality, poverty, and ideas related to movement and place. So let's jump right in. So the first section we're going to discuss is Ben, B-E-E-N. And this section opens with Layman quoting Toni Cade Bambara from The Salt Eaters, which is a really dope book. But if you're interested in Toni Cade Bambara, I suggest picking that book up. But there are some other texts that she has written. She's also made documentaries, so she's a filmmaker or was a filmmaker. She was an activist and a college professor. And she passed away in 1995, but her work is still relevant. One of the key texts for me that she's written is or edited is an anthology called The Black Woman. So the quote that is shared by Layman that we'll begin with it reads, "'Cause wholeness is no trifling matter, a lot of weight when you're well." So the writers of the syllabus ask us to consider what is the connotation of wholeness do we get from this quote? What is the connotation of wholeness that we use in this quote? And what weight is Layman, or does Layman seem to be drawing upon by referencing Bambara? So I don't see any comments yet, so I'll just begin sharing some of my thoughts related to that quote. Weight, in terms of body weight, or corporeal weight, is a constant theme throughout this text. Obviously, it's called heavy, right? But I also believe that heavy and weight is a play on so many things. So weight could really be referencing the weight of existing in the society as for Layman as a Black man, the weight of enduring poverty while at the same time living in a household that sees language and education as the way out of poverty. However, that hasn't worked for his family. And so, yeah, somebody said weight of emotions. I believe that to be true. It's a lot. So that is weighing on not just him, but also his, his family life. Um, I have one request because when I'm using Live Studio, it doesn't tell me who Facebook users are. So if you don't mind, like just putting like your name, your first name or something, or saying this is so and so, so I can shout you out when you have a comment because I can't see your name. So people are in agreement that weight refers to the emotional weight in heavy situations and how heavy they are on your shoulders, on your life, on your existence. So I do believe that is, it's a double entendre, if you will. Weight means multiple things. So the next section in this first area of the book addresses Layman's mother and how his mother feels about language. And so it says, Ben is an address to Layman's mother about all the language he has finally found the space to name. Layman is vulnerable and honest about all the lies he wishes this book was, but is not. What comfort is Layman seeking in telling lies? Is there safety in lying? So there are a lot of things going on, and I thought it was very interesting the way that he opens the book about talking about that this is an American memoir. He wanted it to be an American memoir, and how that is put in conversation with this idea of lying in American society. And we attempt to tell a story. We attempt to. Oh, somebody said there's feedback from the audio. I can't really hear any. I don't know. I'm sorry. If it gets too bothersome, just let me know, please. But yeah, some quotes that are important here are, I wanted to write an American memoir. I wanted to write a lie. I wanted to write about how fundamental present Black fathers, responsible Black mothers, magical Black grandmothers, and perfectly disciplined Black children are to our liberation. I wanted to write a lie, and you wanted to read that lie. I wrote this to you instead. So a question that is asked, let's see. Sorry to pause again. You want to get some headphones? Try to see if this works. Okay, everyone, is it still feedback? Can you let me know? I don't know if you can hear me now, but so we were discussing this idea of him writing a lie and what it really meant. in this book, and I saw this book as really like a letter to his mother, really, but a letter to a larger society as well. And so I'll repeat the questions. Thanks, Ms. Blue. Oh, someone said that it's better. So I don't know. I don't know what to do. Um, so I'm just going to keep going because we only have now 45 minutes. I do see this as like this letter to his mother. Again, some questions that we were asked to consider were what comfort is layman seeking in telling lies, and is there safety in lying? And so some people said lying provides comfort, honesty is freedom. The critique of American memoir is so pointed because it equals this idea of being American to being perfect. It is far from that. His truth is heavy. You do not have to deal with your own vulnerability in order to tell a lie. I do believe that. And so, yeah, I feel like this group of essays speaks to this larger idea of truth telling, and then the reality that this is a memoir. And in memoirs, the expectation, I believe, is to tell the truth. But there are many who have written about memoir writing and autobiographical writing, such as Bell Hooks and Bone Black, and she talks about how really when we're writing our truth, we're only telling part of the story. So we're telling the part of the story that we want people to hear. Someone shared, Facebook Timex Makeup said, although his mother may have been mad about the truth being said, it was so beautiful. I hope she was still proud. The truth is what made it powerful. Somebody else said, Miss Blue, I feel the comfort that he was seeking is the lie that he did not have a troubled and emotionally neglectful childhood. Sheila Pollard said, I feel like him writing this memoir was a letter to himself to free himself from the weight. Yeah, I do. I agree with that as well. I know that a lot of times, like, I don't know for those who like go to therapy or anything, but I'm just gonna be honest. I go to therapy, and so in therapy, one of the things that we often talk about is writing a letter to the person who did something wrong to you. Writing a letter, and you don't necessarily have to give that person that information or give that person that letter, but you're writing it to get through the pain that was experienced, and that's a way of healing. And I feel that this text, this memoir, was the beginning, if not like a component of him healing from all of the things that he went through before. Someone said, Facebook user said, someone once said that memoir is autobiographical fiction. I always thought that was so truthful. And then another Facebook user, I believe this can go into restorative justice or restorative justice model. Telling the story will see them telling the story, maybe help them see the humanity and heart of the individuals. I can tell he took the time to put care into it. Yeah, and somebody said, just like Alex from Such a Fun Age. Akila Grant said, his truth straight out of the gate felt strong, but also vulnerable in a way that is endearing. and made me read more with more intention. I do believe that this text is, or the memoir is something that was extremely important to share. And like I said before, I do believe that it was a mechanism for him to begin healing. And another person say, yes, Alex definitely told herself some serious fiction about her early life. Yes. So let's keep going, because there were a lot of questions for this section. And so I know we probably won't get to all of them, but I would like to get to some of them. So we're going to go to section 1, technically, which is boy, man, and it begins with train. So in this section, Layman writes, unlike us in our rented house, which we shared with thousands of books and 2 families of rats, Beulah Buford and her husband owned her house. That's from page 13, by the way. So the questions related to this are, what emotions is Layman expressing in the sentence? What is the larger implication of juxtaposing renting versus home ownership? And so this section, all I could think about was just my upbringing. And I feel like every time I do one of these lives, I like talk about being from Detroit. But I feel that this section just reminded me of like the differences and the complex dynamics of growing up in an inner city, an urban area, because the area that I grew up in, that was my childhood area, and it was my childhood home. I never moved to a different place ever. And within that space, it was like 4 families, including my own, that owned the homes. And then right across the street, nobody owned anything. They were all renters. And there's always this problematic narrative about those who don't own something as valuing nothing or very little. But I also thought it was important to note that Layman and his mother were very intentional about, intentional about books and ownership and language and things like that. And those are things, sorry, y'all. Those are things that can never be taken away. So even when you're renting, if you own these books, if you have this knowledge, those things go with you. And someone said it was an interesting juxtaposition about being rich in knowledge and material richness. Yes, and that was an important difference. It's extremely complex, and I feel like this is something that we still discuss today, is something that is relevant today. And it's like, what are we valuing, right? Do we value knowledge and having these things that represent this knowledge? Or do we value home ownership, which is connected to that American lie, if you will, like this idea that the American dream is associated with ownership, particularly of homes, and who has access to these homes and things like that. So a Facebook user said it is also a comment on respectability. Yes. So what is more respectable, home ownership or having these books and the rats and the walls and language? Alana said in appearance alone because of actions inside of that home. I think it's rich in knowledge based on, really the richness is material riches, but that really means nothing because look what's happening and going on in the Buford home. There's a lot of drama and violence happening there. So I'm going to move. It's important for us to really discuss some of the things that relate to food and things like that. So it was just interesting to be thinking about this question and how it was posed in the syllabus. And so it says Layman uses, quote, name brands strawberry Pop-Tarts, end quote, as his gauge for understanding Buford's wealth. And related to that are some questions. What markers do we remember as readers from our own childhood that signal the haves and the have-nots? How does Layman go on to contrast Pop-Tarts to the abundance of books in his own home? So I see, I mean, for me, I don't know, this was a difficult question, but it's extremely important because I never thought of strawberry Pop-Tarts or even the Kool-Aid, which he called lemonade. But Layla said it was Kool-Aid because it didn't have any lemons, right? I never thought of these things as representation of wealth. But for somebody who doesn't have access to name brand things, you know, like even Pop-Tarts, it is a sign of abundance. And I think a lot of what happens throughout this memoir is this relationship between food and abundance and richness and wealth. And so Jolie says, yes, having name brand food versus store brand was a signifier if they had money. Maya said, I had to stop a few times. Yeah, it had me thinking deeply and just really questioning my own privilege. Like I had to think about the way I came up. Like, first of all, I didn't really like Pop-Tarts like that, but I mean, but also, you know, these were things that if you didn't really have money, you were getting the Kroger brand or whatever the Meyer brand or whatever if the grocery store down the street, like the hood store, had those things. That was the only way you would even get the off-brand kind. But yeah, so it's interesting. Someone said name brand cereal was a marker of richness growing up. Again, so that is extremely important. So I thought of, I think I moved away from the Pop-Tart thing and started thinking about, you know, what somebody just said, clothing brands was a marker for me because that was a marker for me. Like, I went to private school all my life. And then when I went to high school, it was in a wealthier part of Michigan. It was an all-girl, predominantly white school. And within that school, clothing was like, you know, like the thing. It was like how you became popular. Like, and those were things that I could not afford, right? Like those were, like I grew up, even though like there were certain things, I had privileges in certain ways, I grew up with a single father who wasn't about to like go to whatever to buy all these things just so I could fit in, right? But this shows privilege because cars was a thing, a marker for my, like for me too, because in high school, all of my classmates had cars and they had like Lincolns and Cadillacs and Benz trucks and all these things. And I had like a little, I don't even remember, Dodge Shadow or something that the engine was about to blow up, but still I had a car in comparison to other people. So someone said shoes were a marker. People going on vacations, that was something we never did, like ever. And so, for me, and getting a bit personal for a bit, it was never hearing my friends say, I don't have money for that. I say as I would always have to skip out on getting food outside with friends. And because my mom never had money to spare to give for lunch, so hear you on that. Others felt that as well. Houses with yards were markers of wealth growing up. Um, oh yes, the cars in high school. My friends would have cars while I would be riding the school bus. We had to take the bus everywhere. So yeah, these are like markers. So I feel like this Pop Tart situation is a symbol of so much more. So I'm gonna keep going, and I just want to let you know that this next section, it might be triggering for some, and so if this is something you don't really want to discuss, like this might be a time that you can like go to the bathroom or something. But there are instances of sexual violence here, and so this part talks about the interactions between Key, Dougie, who are 12 years old, Layla, who's 15, Daryl, and the big boys who are older, they're 17. And these rules that came about during their interaction with each other. And so some of the questions that were asked related to this were, how does Key's recollection about the rules and Layla's vulnerability connect to conversations about children, harm, and violence? And there were some more specific questions, so I'll just go ahead and ask those and we can begin having a conversation about that. But how do the age differences among the children impact their relationship to each other? And what other differences impact the power dynamics in relationship between the children? So I'll just go ahead and say, I like coming up, I remember rules, like these rules that are not written, but it's like rules of engagement, if you will, like, because I was younger, and in my neighborhood also, like I was the only girl. So often there were these rules, like I couldn't do certain things, or I had to do this in order to do this, or hang out with certain people. And it really causes some major damage, right? And it asks about differences, other differences in their impact on power dynamics, and specifically in this case, I believe like image, right? So it's image, there's gender that's playing a role, so not just age, but then also like body image and size plays a role as well. And it was very disheartening to read the parts where Key was just really questioning his worth because people didn't, or the other teenagers or preteens did not value him, right? So someone said, I'm a prior Facebook user. I'm a prior caseworker. Child on child abuse is so common and not always reported. This is true. I mean, like, and I don't want to like generalize, but I will tell you, like, those who I know, like for the most part, and I'm not gonna say everyone, but for the most part, have had some experience of what like we would call now as bullying. And it was sort of thrown under the rug, like, you know, like, you just toughen up. Like, what are you doing? Like, why are you upset about, you know, like, these things? Like, just toughen up a little bit. And I think that, like, mentality still exists, but there are larger efforts to eradicate these notions of bullying. Miss Blue said, that train part in the book made me so uncomfortable. It was surreal because during that age, I can vividly recall boys always pressuring us girls to let them feel and we couldn't sit in. And yeah, I mean, I think it was uncomfortable because perhaps like so many of us have even experienced it or seen somebody else, acknowledge somebody else endure it, and it was like, at that point, like, what do you do? How do you like say anything? Do you respond? Do you fight back? What is the response to that? So Miss Blue again said, in the back of the bus with the cool kids during the field trips. Oh, you couldn't sit, yeah. A Facebook user said it was so clear that Kiese and Dougie looked up to the bigger boys and it really shaped their outlook, even though they were still questioning the big boys' actions. Yeah. And another user said currently one and see it all the time. Another Facebook user saying, but when I had to pay, oh, okay. I don't know if that was about that. And then I want to ask, what in him made him know not to engage? I was thinking that too. Like, and I think we see it with young boys and adolescent boys and girls all the time. Like there are some who just like, that is not for me. You know, like that is not something I'm going to engage in. But there's no lesson. Like we don't talk about these things. I know, like me personally, my father did not talk about this at all. Like if anything related to sexuality or sexual interactions came up, it was like, oh, changing the subject. Like, how dare you? And so many of us are raised in climates where we can't even like be open about the things that we're encountering. So someone said, my assumption was his mama or his gut feeling or his confusion and headaches and stress. Yeah. Related back to the question about what made him not engage. A Facebook user said that section also reminded me of the alley scene from Women Abuser. It makes me want to ask men where they learned this, I guess, where they learned this stuff. That was Joey. And that the big boys didn't pressure him either. That was surprising for me that they allowed him to do as he wanted. That was another thing that was interesting to me, that they, like, whenever I like hear things or you even see other things in the media, you see others being pressured into acting in certain ways or like to doing what everyone else is doing, or like you're seen as a problem. But we didn't get that from that situation. And maybe he didn't talk about that. Like when we talked about at the beginning of this, like memoirs are like part truth, part fiction, right? Like we know what they want us to know about things. But I do have a feeling that he did elect to like just not be part of that situation. Serena Thompson said was his weight, his protection. So I see his weight again, like as something, again, that's a theme throughout this entire thing. I see it as protection, but I also believe, like from reading these things, that he saw it as like this problematic thing, right? And so it was his protection, but it also prevented him from being desired in his eyes. So someone said, I ain't asking where they learn. I want them to change, and I don't want women to be the ones always doing the work. Really, the reality is, if any of this is going to change, if sexual violence is going to end, then that means that all of us have to play a role in ending it, in creating that change. So those who are typically oppressed and the survivors of violence don't always have to do work, just like Black folks don't always have to educate white folks on racism, right? So we don't always have to do the work. We need to, like, other people have to step up, particularly those with privilege. Someone said, y'all got to remember he was a husky kid, the assumption that they have on bigger children and pleasure. Yeah. I mean, there are some assumptions, and this actually gets into some other questions throughout this section, and I'm trying to, actually it's still part of this at the end, when he's talking about Renata, his babysitter, and her sexual violence against him, and when he's also in that situation questioning his size, right, and his desirability. So yeah, I think pleasure and weight are things that we don't think about, or body image, pleasure and body size are things that we don't think about often. Um, Someone said it reads to be the beginning stages of fat phobia. Yeah. And I think it's also internalized fat phobia as well. Somewhere along the line, he's learned that being his size is not okay. And I don't, like that's problematic. Um, I was thinking he found it questionable with regard to his body that they didn't want him to do what they wanted the others to do. Yeah. I see it like, again, like he directly questions if he was desirable or not. Like, why aren't these people selecting him to participate? Why aren't people attracted to him? Right. And so, so with Face Climax Makeup said they were all scared of his mother too, which yes, I probably would be scared of her too. But yeah. Protecting, coping, weighted confusion. And I think this is referring to Key and his body size, his experiences with weight, and the role that it played. And coping, particularly, I think this is one of the, so like research shows people who are victims of abuse, right, sometimes eat as a response because they feel that the bigger they are, the less they will sort of be seen. It's sort of like this combination or complexity or dynamic between hypervisibility and invisibility. So if I like get this big and I do these things, and people won't pay attention to me anymore. And so it in some ways is a coping mechanism. So someone says, I'm actually still a little puzzled about the nature of PSA and his mom's relationship. That relationship was, it had me thinking a lot of things. I was still wondering about certain things. And somebody else said, Maya, I was a bit unclear if his being repeatedly assaulted or molested by his babysitter began after Layla's rape by the older boys. And I think, so this is what happens in memoirs too, like sometimes stories don't follow a straight pattern. So it might have a timeline, but things are kind of choppy, and so we don't know exactly when things happen. But we are having a conversation with him, and so perhaps that's an opportunity for us to ask him these questions related to the gaps, like things we want to know. And then Face Climax Makeup said there was so much violence in the way he abused his body through food all through the book. Yeah. And I believe this is something that we don't think about sometimes, about the relationship, like our relationship to food and this notion of violence. So, okay, y'all, we have 16 minutes, and so I have to get to some other sections. So the next section is 9, or Nan. So this section is really about the role of language throughout this book, and the role particularly of African American vernacular English and language and rules related to language. And so some questions that were asked were, what are our relationships to language? What are some of the rules we learned growing up about language, and the role that African American vernacular English played in it? And this section also talks about hunger as well, related to his mom, language, and hunger. And so, so someone talked about how well All About Love informs how we read heavy, and I felt that so much. It's they actually could go hand in hand. And on the Facebook posts, I mean, people said that continuously. And so it's important to sort of revisit both of them collectively. So I'll just say, related to these questions about his mother and the uses of language and African American vernacular English, it's extremely important to me. Like, she placed such a high value on a particular type of language or correctness, if you will. And one of the things that I thought of is this idea of code switching and how it is a tool for us, particularly for Black folks as we navigate the world. It is one of the ways that we enter into spaces that people don't want us to be part of. But language and the ability to code switch is one of the ways that we continue to remain in those spaces. And so language, just like weight and just like food and hunger, was something that existed throughout this entire text, like the entire memoir. And it's important. One thing the reader said, one thing I have to keep repeating while reading Layman and Hooks is that my parents did the best they could, even though those choices wounded me in many ways. This is something my father always says to me, and it relates to that comment. And it is like, I did the best that I could. There's no guidebook on parenting. And, like, I just did the best that I could with what I had and what I needed to do. And I think many parents, that is how they feel. However, that does not take away from, the trauma experienced by children, because they still at some point have to deal with it and hopefully heal from it, despite their parents doing the best that they could. So, Face Climax Makeup, his mother's reaction to African American vernacular was disturbing. I wonder what it triggered for her. Yeah, and I think that's a thing, like another question that perhaps we could get is like this backstory. But I do know language, right, is powerful. Naming is powerful. The ability to articulate oneself in particular situations helps us in navigating and being part or present in certain spaces. And I believe that his mother saw language and this idea of proper language as a means of, moving up in the world, a means of eventually making a way out of poverty. A Facebook user said it was almost as if she viewed proper grammar as protection, a form of respectability. Proper grammar is deeply connected with respectability politics. It's a behavioral idea of respectability. So if you speak in a particular way, we're more respectable, i.e. the code switching. Layman says, ain't nothing in the world worse than looking at your children drowning, knowing ain't nothing you can do because you're scared that if you get to trying to save them, they might see that you can't swim either. And I think that relates very well to the statement. That is a really good and deep quote. And it is important, and I wonder if I can show it. I don't know if it shows the whole thing, but I think it's a comment that we should keep in mind when reading this and other texts and thinking through our experiences growing up, right? I mean, because parents are people just like us, right? They're trying to navigate this world just like us. And, if I am not a parent, but if I were a parent at this moment, I'd be like, oh my goodness, I know my child would be like, who told her to have a child? Because I'm still working through life, right? And so I can only imagine having to act like you got everything together when in reality you don't. And it's hard to tell your parents that their best still left you lacking. This is true. But sometimes it needs to be said too. I think that's true, but acknowledging that those choices might be wrong is important to your children's growth, development, and it adds to their parenting skills when they become parents. Ownership is very important. It is. And acknowledging things allows everyone to begin. I think of healing all the time. It allows everyone to begin healing. Kristen Thomas said, I wonder if her reaction had to do with her living in Mississippi as well. So again, I really do believe that there is a major relationship between language and behavior and respectability, and these notions of respectability and how they coincide with race relations, particularly in the South. And so I do believe that parents who would be Key's mother's age, right, would still believe that doing certain things and acting in particular ways would position them in a different way and lead to upward mobility and lead to them being seen as, a greater or a better family in the eyes of white folks in Mississippi. So Maya said the scene where they are in the grocery store was so interesting. Her fixation on African American vernacular and her questioning other people's language. What's their excuse? Juxtaposed with her own mom using AAVE. That wasn't, it is, but it's sort of like what we're talking about, parents doing different things, right? And doing the best, or letting us know that they're doing the best that they can. And this idea that we don't question our parents too, or we've been brought up to believe that, and so, or a lot of us have. Related to language, many of us are taught to code switch to protect us, but later on we often have to reconcile how that is rooted in anti-Blackness. This is true. Yeah, it is. Code switching is a mechanism for upward mobility. It's a mechanism for survival, but ultimately it doesn't help us thrive as Black folks and honor ourselves and our histories. So, face climax makeup, Maya, yes, I'm betting she was embarrassed by her mother many times. Yeah, so we're gonna go to the next one. The next section is wet. And this section really talks about several things related to men in the life of Key or Key. So it really talks about Malachi Hunter, this person or man or Black activist, if you will, or Black revolutionary in the life of Key's mom. And in addition, Delaney and Dougie. And it sort of puts these notions of masculinity in relationship to each other, or in conversation with each other. So you have Malachi, who is attempting, it seems, to behave in a way that is sort of either masculine or what I would call like toxic masculine, I can't talk right now, toxic masculinity. And then you have Delaney and Dougie, right, who are outside of this space, attempt to demonstrate that they are the big boys, they are bad, they are popular, right, or they run the Buford home. However, they are engaging in something that many would suggest is not masculine at all, right? And so I think this section was very interesting. And so some questions here are, again, this is about sexual violence and manipulation and the relationship to masculinity. And so I'll read some quotes and see if we have some responses. So this one says, "My head hurt. I don't understand why Delaney thought teaching me chopsticks would make what he did okay, or why Dougie's hands were behind his back while he was on his knees. I didn't understand why Delaney seemed so happy to be part of a train, but so scared for me to know what he did with Dougie." And then this other section that really did something for me when I was reading it, or to me, is, "A part of me didn't understand why the big boys wanted to be in rooms along with Dougie and Layla and not me." And that particular quote really, it kind of broke my heart when reading it. And the question related to it asks, how does this moment where he's asking himself or saying these things, but asking himself, why not me? It says, how does this moment handle desire, violence, fatness, and anti-fatness? And so I see this really in talking about the complexity of desirability, particularly for adolescent Black children and teenagers, and this idea that regardless of the consequences, you still want to be seen as desirable, and the role that his body played in making him feel like he wasn't, because people weren't attracted enough to him that they asked him to participate in the train earlier, and they asked him to participate, right, or manipulated him into being with Delaney and Dougie. So it was sad to me, but it reminds me of really victims of sexual assault, period, because you kind of wonder, like, why this is happening, what did you do, or what didn't you do? And so it is internalizing, like, this lack of desirability for him, in my opinion. So the next question asks about we're going to skip because nobody has said anything about this. And we have 2 minutes, and this is the last section. And it's about PSA and his grandmother, his relationship with his grandmother, and his grandmother's side hustles, and the role of side hustles in the lives of Black folks, particularly Black women. And this section and the questions that were asked really made me think about the text that we read by Patricia Hill Collins, Black Feminist Thought, where she talked about Black women and their role as domestic workers, and how they had this, like, knowledge, inside, outside knowledge, because they were in and around white folks all day. But when they were outside of that space, white folks made it seem like they were holier than thou or better than them. But in reality, they saw, the problems within those spaces. And so I just kept thinking about that when PSA talked about his grandmother. So some of the questions that were asked here were the role side hustles have played in your life, the role that side hustles have played to nurture the informal economy of Black folks. And I'll be honest, like, so, Face Climax Makeup said, I loved his grandma. I liked his grandma too, because she reminded me of my grandmother. My grandmother dropped out of, had to leave college to work on a farm in 4th grade. And really could read the Bible best out of all things. But out of all family members, probably outside of my father, I remember her stories the most. And her stories are the thing that led me to continue getting an education. And she didn't speak proper English, if you will. She could barely read. So, but I learned the most from her. But yeah, I believe that his grandmother really was, at this point in the story, his biggest support system, because Layman could actually use the language that he knew, right, and the skill of writing to share the things that have happened to him. What I didn't like is that his grandmother said, like, you just have to get over it, basically. Like, these are things that happen. And so we just have to get through it. So I think that his grandmother played a large role and served as his balance. Someone said, yes, his grandmother in the beginning was what kept me going. All of my grandmothers are old Black women from the Deep South, and all of his stories of his grandma literally could have been my grandma's, yeah. And I mean, I think that's the thing, like, we often forget about the wisdom that our grandmothers and older folks in our lives have, and we place, like, learned or academic work sometimes over that wisdom. Again, this is something that was talked about in Black feminist thought, but in reality, I believe that at this point in KSA's life, his grandmother was his, like, his hope, right? His grandmother was the thing that kept him going. Someone said, when he put all that down in writing and she did not say anything, I sighed, yeah. I don't know. Like, I mean, that was heartbreaking to me, but I do believe that is one of those things, just like the parenting issues we were talking about earlier. I believe that's something that, like, that is how our ancestors survived. Like, they survived by, like, they just kept going because they didn't know, like, what happens if you, like, talk back, right, or accuse someone of doing something or speak up about something. So I think they were taught to just sort of either manipulate the situation and get hurt, injured, or killed, or they were taught to just keep it moving. And I'm not saying that's healthy, because this is why intergenerational trauma still exists, right? Maya says side hustles are such a deep reality for Black folks. It's fascinating to see the idea of the gig economy is being widely acknowledged. Yes, profited from and celebrated now by white America. This is true. I think of side hustles too as like for me, like the fact that Black women are the number one, like we're the largest demographic or the number one growing demographic of small business owners, and it's because we all have so many side hustles. And I think we've come to the conclusion, like we've realized that we, like, again, it is not enough to survive anymore. Like, in order to create intergenerational wealth, we have to keep going and moving forward, and we got to do some different things. And so, like, for me, I got three businesses, like, like my plan is to continue working for the oppressor, like, for the rest of my life. And so, but also the plan is not to ever have to ask somebody else to help me. And unless it's like extremely necessary. So I believe like our ancestors taught us this. And so we're just continuing along these lines. Face Climax Makeup says, makes me wonder what kind of grandmas we will be as millennials. This is true. Or great aunties, because I don't have kids, so I'll probably just be a great auntie. But yeah, so I think we'll be dope grandmas and great aunties. I think we'll share these lessons as well. I think we have wisdom. I know we have wisdom based on the experiences that we've had. I'm going to, it's 8:05, so I'm going to end there. I know that we went through these sections quickly. There were tons of questions here. I hope that you have an opportunity to go through and sort of reflect on those questions if you have time for yourself. I'm excited about the next discussion, which is on part 2. And I hope that you all can chime in and discuss it. I know I'll be there. Someone said, I'm just trying to apply it now as a mom. So I'm not a mom, but I do try to apply it as a mentor for my students that I work with, providing wisdom. And someone says, I cannot wait until we work one job and thrive. All the side hustles can be turned. It's true. It is. But I have a saying that, my passion wakes me up. So it's the thing that keeps me going. Thanks. I'm sorry for all the technical difficulties and the feedback. I'll try to work on it whenever I have. I'm doing, I forgot which part, but all about love in the future. But please check out the schedule for future Facebook Lives and YouTubes, and make sure you join. Thanks for dealing with my issue, the technical issues, and thanks for the conversation. Bye, y'all.